Hey everybody, today I'm going to be talking about APIs. My name's Dallin Snell. So when you Google API, I believe the second option that comes up is the American Petroleum Institute. That's not what I'm talking about today. That's something completely different and not covered by this material. So today we're going to talk about what an API is. I'm going to give you some examples of an API, and then also show you some real-world examples of APIs, where APIs are actually used for programs that people use in their everyday lives. And I'm also going to discuss the different types of APIs that are out there, because believe it or not, there's more than one. So what is an API? An API stands for Application Programming Interface, and is literally exactly what it sounds. It allows a programmer who is writing an application to interface with a third-party service. It's really all there is. Sounds simple, and it's very powerful though. The API provides a level of abstraction between the programmer and whatever third-party service that he might be using at the time, and I'll get into a little bit more of that later. An API can be a programmer's friend by giving him access to a powerful set of tools that he can use to manipulate data and to make his application more robust, whether that's a mobile application or a desktop application, whatever it is, it can be a great benefit to him. However, if the API is poorly documented or illy constructed or just not formatted the way that it should, it can actually become a detriment to the programmer, especially if he has to use that API for his work. Like he's forced to use that API to build an application that the end user wants. So some examples of APIs are Facebook. Facebook has an API. Twitter. Slack has an API. I don't know how many people have actually used Slack before. I've actually used Slack a whole lot, here being at BYU-I. Instagram, the Oxford Dictionary, even Brightspace, who does iLearn, they have an API that we can use. And more. There's not just these ones listed here. Everybody has an API that we use or can use. And it's not moving. Why isn't my slide going anywhere? There we go. Okay, so some real-world examples. Apple actually uses PayPal's API for Siri in order to enable iPhone users to pay money over their voice or using their voice with Siri. I personally don't own an iPhone, so I've never used this service before. I have an Android phone, and so it's slightly different for me. But you iPhone users out there, if you use Siri to transfer money or to pay people, you have PayPal's API to thank for it. Facebook uses something similar. I believe they use Zelle, Z-E-L-L-E, if I'm not mistaken. That's the one that Facebook uses. That's the API that they use in order to allow money transfers via Facebook Messenger. So that's another example of APIs being used in the real world. And actually, I used an API when I was doing my Android mobile development class. It was a simplistic example. They just wanted to introduce us to using APIs and to get us kind of in the swing of using Android development. So what we did is we actually used Twitter's API to reach out to Twitter and grab all of the tweets that had a particular hashtag. I think If I'm remembering correctly, it was a few semesters back, but I believe it was the hashtag BYU-Y. It's kind of a generic one, big, but there's a lot of tweets. But we would reach out to Twitter and we would grab all of the tweets that had that hashtag. And it's a lot of data to process. There were a lot of tweets that had BYUI. But using the API, it was incredibly easy to format all of these tweets and display them in our application, because all we had to do was make a call to the API and say, hey, this is what I want done. And a lot of thanks to Twitter for generating the API for us. The API just sat there and smiled at us and said, okay, and it did what we wanted it to do. So there wasn't any of this raw data manipulation that we had to do. It was all taken care of it was all done for us by Twitter. And so it was really neat to see that in action. Granted, it was a simplistic example and not really something that I needed to use. I mean, I don't need all of the tweets that had BYUI in it, but it allowed for a good example of how APIs worked. So what are there's different types of APIs. You have OS or operating system APIs that are used by higher level applications, such as PowerPoint that I'm using right now, to interface with lower level operating system functions. This makes it to where the developer doesn't have to be all up in the nitty-gritty details and minutia of the operating system. They can just make a call to the API, and the API will handle all of the calls to their operating system directly on its own. They also have remote APIs. These ones are really interesting. So these ones are happening when you're dealing with such things as databases. Databases normally aren't on site where you are. You leave all of the database work to the database administrator. He's the one who deals with all of that, and then you're off site, so the database isn't local to you. It's remote. And so you would use a remote API to reach out and touch this database, to access this database for you, to where that database seems like it's local. It's not, and it might never be, but this API allows you to treat it as if it were. You have all of the sets of protocols and methods that you need in order to use this database as if it were local. There are also web APIs that allow web developers to create web applications for their users. For example, your bank might have a web application that allows you to transfer money or pay someone, similar to the Siri and PayPal example, and they would use an API in order to interface with all the nitty-gritty functions of moving your money around. So in conclusion, we have APIs. They're application programming interfaces, literally just allowing a programmer who is developing an application to interface with a third-party service. It's as simple as that. And everybody uses them, from Facebook to Instagram. Well, they're owned by the same company, so it's kind of the same thing. But I mean, you have Twitter, you have Brightspace with iLearn, you have your bank. My bank is USAA. They have an API. And it would allow me, if I were developing a banking application, it would allow me to interface with them. So everybody's got them, and it allows for so much more power in developing applications. Also, in the previous slide, we talked about the different types of APIs. You have OS or operating system APIs, from higher level applications interfacing to the low level operating system functions. You have remote APIs for databases that are off-site, allows you to use them as if they were local, and you have web APIs that allow web developers to create web applications using third-party services as well. Thank you all so much for listening and for watching, and I hope you all learned something. Thank you.